Hello, YouTube friends. I'm thinking of calling this Behind the Curtain and Under the Carpet. Two expressions that most people know, behind the curtain and under the carpet. And I just want to say thank you. I just passed the 1,200 subscribers. I got 1,201 subscribers. Fucking A. I am really pleased to have more people on board. Now, the curious thing to me is, though, about, let's see, maybe a couple of months ago, I had 1,100 subscribers, and now with what's that, 100 more, my view counts haven't changed practically at all. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know how that works. But thanks for subscribing. It means somebody out there is listening to the spontaneous and random insights from the studio, which is what you get when you turn on to my channel. You get to hear what a person that calls himself a painter. Notice I hardly ever refer to myself as an artist, because everybody these days is an artist. If you go out and even you look on people's fridges, and I love kids and I love kids art, but in the context of a mother and father being so proud of their child making a drawing, which they should be, but it has nothing to do with being an artist. It just has to do with an individual soul emerging from its shell, which is all of us. We are individual souls emerging out of our shell. And I think it's rather important in what I talk about to create a connection to what that means in terms of having a choice. That as we become aware of what it means to exist as a life form called human beings and all the other life forms around us, what the heck does that all mean? And we look outside of ourselves, and for the most part, I would say life is spent looking outside of ourselves. But then every now and then we have this kind of niggly urge to wonder what it means when you no longer, let's say you close your eyes and you go with what appears to be, what is that? When you're no longer influenced by anything that is around you, what happens there? Possibly in a total silence. Just submerge yourself in a swimming pool sometime and go underwater and close your eyes, and you're surrounded by a silence, and there is a peculiar feeling of listening to your heartbeat, or just having the sensation of you're floating like you're back in the womb, what that might have felt like. Unfortunately, I don't remember what that was like, but I suspect that it may be similar to floating in a pool of water and submersing yourself and holding your breath and just being like totally by yourself sometimes. And as a painter, I have to say that I quite often find myself by myself, and it's something that a lot of people have a hard time with. There is, especially at this time of year, this is the pagan holiday among Catholics and Roman Catholics and Christians, known as Christmas, when Satan comes and gives gifts, when Santa comes and gives children gifts, and we keep telling children that there is some character called Santa who's going to do something nice for them, and everybody gets worked up. I was worked up as a child, and actually in Germany it's the Christ child. My mother left the window open at Christmas. We couldn't be in the room, and then we would get to go into the room, and there were the gifts on the table. It was fabulous, and it was Jesus, but eventually I figured out it was not Jesus at all. There was a kind of rude awakening. So stop giving the kids the pablum. I'm not saying you can't tell kids fantasticorical stories, but not when they're so tied to a philosophy of destruction, like the Christian, the organizations that huddle around this concept of biblical stories, and they make it into institutions with people, these sissies that wear dresses, these men that wear dresses, and they accost children for their own pleasure. So to continue this kind of pretense that it's perfectly all right to love the sissies in dresses who give you gifts. Well, this is wrong somehow in my mind. Where am I going with my spontaneous insights? I suppose I'm ridiculing, but I'm ridiculing those that deserve my ridicule because I'm offended. I'm offended by the way this culture has emerged and has developed over supposedly 6,000 years that nobody really knows what happened. Most people don't even remember their shopping list from 2 weeks ago or even a few days ago. So don't tell me about 6,000 years of history or 4 or 5 billion years of Earth existence and 15 or 14 billion years of universal existence and this hooey about big bangs that exploded and created all matter and the laws governing that matter. At an instant, all these kind of stories. Stop telling children these stories because we don't know. And there is, in my philosophy, what I adhere to is the a posteriori, which is experiential. And I think there are times at which I have a level of faith, I suppose, in people, especially if they appear honest to me. I have a level of faith in people. So I'm kind of just rolling along here, and I'm going to address an issue. Like I said, I open it up behind the curtain and under the carpet. And what is happening is behind the curtain, and whatever comes out of the curtain or whatever is revealed, not behind the curtain, gets swept under the carpet. So we're kind of in a double quandary here because no matter how much we discover what's behind the curtain, it gets swept under the carpet. And this is a system that we are all a part of that is placed on top of us. We are not the principals in the system that we adhere to. We're literally the hamsters pushing this wheel of reality around with our actions and our thoughts and our beliefs and all the things that we attach ourselves to that we have no real conviction about. I'm not even going to say that it's a complete and total truth that we believe to be adhered to, because we don't have any primary experience of that which we believe. We just sort of accept something that somebody told us, and after a while it becomes ritualized. And this is where I like certain YouTube channels that decipher what are through the numerical understanding of reality. In other words, there is a coded reference in all activities that are external to us. This is an important word for me. External. The inner world that I've talked about in my last videos, and then there's the external world. And what we adhere to, for the most part, 99% of our living experience is always the external world. And there's that tiny little component in every person's life that is focused on something that is when you're submersed in the pool underwater in total silence of some kind, just hearing your own heartbeat. This is rare in most people's lives, unfortunately. And of course, people like myself, painters, and other painters, and I'll even use the word artists, and I'm talking now about artists in a very specific way, not in the kind of notion that the world forces on us to believe that everybody is an artist. No, there are very, very few people that I consider to be artists, and even fewer painters. There are very few painters left on earth that really are actually doing the painting on the level of painting that I've understood to be magnificent painting. There are very few left out there. But within this context of understanding that there are people out there that are alerting us to this 1% of us. I'm just picking 1%. It may even be a lot less or maybe a little bit more. I don't know. I'm just saying that there is a world out there that most of the people you will encounter on YouTube are talking about continuously. I say it's regurgitating the man's story. And the man has created a story for everybody to listen to and be preoccupied with. And even the fabulous analysis by people like Mr. Cat-Eye, who doesn't appear to like the gematria guy, who are always at each other's, and they're complaining. Stop complaining about each other. If you have a vision, I made this comment, if you have a vision and you are secure in that vision, you don't need to attack or criticize anyone. I mean, there is a level of, I suppose, a tolerance that we need to develop as we become more mature in our own understanding of what we truly feel within ourselves. And we don't have to go out in a sort of being irritated by, and I understand this feeling of being irritated because I get criticized and attacked, and I used to be a lot more offended by it, but not so much now. I just respond as best I can. So I'm just saying, I left a comment and I said, well, you with a vision have the satisfaction of having something profound that comes out of that inner part of you. That's beautiful. That's magnificent. It's like anything that is of value in this existence comes from an inner directive, not an external directive. It's the external is completely and totally dysfunctional without that inner guidance, for lack of better words. So our world, no matter how wonderful we think it is, if it's not based on that inner vision, that inner guidance, where that we accomplish over time, especially if we put a bit of an effort into it, and there are many different ways of doing that. I could go into that, you know, how to structure it through my own experience of what gives me the satisfaction of being a human being at this time. What is it that gives me the fortitude to continue under such stress, the stress that's coming from the outside world, but also from not recognizing the things that well up inside of me. And people that have listening to me, and the new people that have come to my channel, I'm really big on this thing called conscience. Like huge, it's huge. And there is a side to this. I think is actually quite universal, and I haven't got an explanation for it, but it exists universally in each human being. I would say that percentage-wise, it's a huge percentage. There may be an aberration. You could have your theories about where this aberration may take place in what appears to be a human being that doesn't have a conscience. I personally have never come across anyone, like personally, I see there appear to be people out there, you know, when you go into the Obamas and the Bushes and the Cheneys and the Aleister Crowley types and those that seem to exist just to gratify their own desires and needs. There is a dysfunction there that could possibly be an aberration within their structure, but I personally have never met a person that doesn't have a conscience, because you can just feel it. And this is something, you know, everybody has their own sensibilities and sensitivities, and we always get better at it, and we understand a person's intent quite often, even though we want to ignore it. I'm a culprit to this. I understand that people have an intent, and I just say to myself, no, I'm wrong about that, and then it turns out, yeah, I was right. So there is a way of, I suppose, forcing the issue about the circumstances we are in right now by invoking what I'm saying, this idea of conscience. And people will say, okay, look, Ackerman, this is so prevalent. You're beating this thing. It's so obvious why you're bringing it up. But I beg to differ. Sometimes the most obvious thing is the least recognized, because it's right under our noses, and something that will actually create a path for us individually and collectively, and it's being covered up in very nefarious and clever ways. And that is by having all of us focus on a story that is originating outside of us, meaning that our own experience, our own perception was not involved in creating the story that we adhere to. So basically what you have is what is understood as civilization is somebody else's story. And it can easily be hijacked. And I'm finding people that are very gifted, people that are practicing disciplines within the artistic field, or whatever discipline they may be practicing. They are not to be trusted, as far as I'm concerned, unless they invoke within me, or I recognize within them, the sense of conscience. Meaning that there is no universal truth, but there is a universality about the intent which causes me to act. And this is something I feel that everyone can recognize on some level or other. At different stages in our lives, it becomes easier once we practice this recognition part within ourselves and others. And as this happens, I find this quite extraordinary because lives begin to change. I see this in my own life. I see this in people that are beginning to act in compliance with that inner voice, that, as Kandinsky even mentioned, inner necessity in one of his pivotal, in his pivotal dissertations on the spiritual in art. He kind of went off, it's not a thick book, but he kind of went off into his own personal rantings that don't apply very much, but he did identify this aspect, inner necessity, which is something that quite a lot of artists are recognizing in the work that they do, meaning that they don't build their work on something that comes from an external source, but it's an entirely from an inner source, and sometimes it's even thought of as being original, I suppose. That's part of the art side of things. And I'm enjoying this dissertation right now because quite often I'm upset and quite angry with circumstances as they're unfolding around me, as I also perceive. I have eyes, ears, sensibilities. I take things in, and it does make me. Here's what happens. I went for a walk last night, and as I'm looking up, I see this luminary object called the moon, and of course, in my own understanding and perceptions and rationale, so many things do not make sense about the world as it appears to me, especially in terms of the way others have interpreted it or want me to see it. So, we listen to organizations that are called scientific organizations that have enormous reach and budgets like NASA, or even companies. When you have these enormous conglomerates, these companies that are hoarding and controlling so much wealth, and it's in their interest to create stories that perpetuate and continue a certain kind of behavior. But anyway, I'm walking and I'm saying to myself, I've been exposed to people's research and ideas regarding what it is that we all seem to see. Now, you look up at the night sky and quite often you'll see a moon, a full moon, half moon, whatever. And what in fact is this thing out there? There's so many things that don't make sense. And I thought to myself, rather than trying to figure out exactly what it might or might not be, I said, somehow it exists because there is intent. With any organization, with anything that is organized into a being, into a body, into anything, there is, like, you have an object, there is intent. And in the same sense, even if it's a natural appearing object like the moon, or you have trees, and you have the explosive reality called life within existence, there is intent. So I'm noodling, I'm wondering. And honestly wondering, not trying to regurgitate someone else's perception of the bardo, like this spiritual grease monkey, the Cliff High guy. I find him quite entertaining and hilarious, and he every now and then does come out with an interesting observation, but it's always this regurgitation with an interpretation of what I have a romance with eternity, and there are people out there invoking or creating stories that regurgitate the usual stuff. So I'm not interested in that because it doesn't really satisfy me. And I mean, if it was true, if it was really true, I'll get to it at some point. If people like the Pope or Cliff High, I don't know why I relate those two at this point in my thoughts, but if people make pronouncements about something, I will begin to accept it as it is masticated within my own spirit, or I'll masticate it within my own spirit. And if I pop something out from this stuff and it makes sense, then I'll accept it. But generally speaking, what really, and this comes back to behind the curtain and under the carpet, that I'm walking and I'm saying to myself, there is obviously a magnificence that I find great reverence for that surrounds me. This magnificent intent that in so many ways is going badly, badly wrong. And it appears primarily through human consciousness. But I'm not entirely convinced about this, because there are many people who have ideas and theories about forces among us that are not necessarily of us. Could it possibly be that what we understand to be creation is in fact a highly organized plan? To what end? I don't know. We have a tendency to assign deity to this mystery because it is apparently very complex and we don't have a good explanation. Even what the hell is light? How does it travel at the speed that it's supposed to be traveling? It's a bunch of hooey. I no longer ascribe to the standard stories. So throw it all out and let's give this a shot of just truly wondering and just placing ourselves in a the closest I would imagine my own self being inspired is to allow this observation and wonder to motivate my spirit to express itself in an unobstructed way. The way I approach making a painting, it is unobstructed. Or at the best of times, I do not get in the way of something that wants to emerge. And I think this is an exercise that can be done not just by making a painting or have a creative act, but just recognizing something that wells up within inside of us. This is very crucial to me being able to exist at this time with the knowledge and understanding and abilities that I have. And my friend this morning at breakfast said, we're only using very few synapses. He always relates to the brain part of it. And this has been talked about before, that we only use 10% or 5% of our brain. Well, what turned it off? He said, well, what is it that turned off all those functions? Let's say you have a board with lots of switches. You have like 100 switches. Why are only 5 switched on? Why are all the others switched off? Who switched them off? And why are they why don't they get switched on, or why don't they come on? Well, I'm saying that we're not ready to have them switched on because we're the ones going to switch them on or not. That's what I think. So the story, what is behind the curtain, is functioning because we're not switched on. Once we're switched on, or as we progressively switch on, these things will become more clear. And as in a painting, stuff becomes more elegant as we proceed down this path of allowing ourselves, giving ourselves the luxury of the experience without having the external world continuously intruding on us. And I'll make this my final point, that as long as we are kept from, and I like this idea that he said of switching on, that as long as we are kept in the dark, that which is behind the curtain continuously intrudes on this potential within us. So the external world as behind the curtain, that is behind the curtain, the external world, because we don't really know what the hell it is that is being organized for us, continuously intrudes on this possibility. Whether it is in this civilized world, we're being told that we're so fortunate, but meanwhile everybody is struggling to make an existence in order to accumulate, for example, more wealth. So you go into debt, and by the time you're done, all you're doing is spinning your wheel trying to pay off debt. I mean, how much more can you eat? And then there's an entire segment of the population that is presented to us as being unfortunate, so you feel better about going to a job, working 12 hours a day because somebody's sleeping on a park bench. Well, why not get the society cleaned up the way we could and have the abundance and plenty that is actually possible without behind the curtain stuff going on. See, we could have a completely enlightened experience as we are alive, but it's being hijacked, and we are not, and what is fundamentally hijacked is not our rights to anything, but our ability to turn our attention inside to create an effect. Like if you throw a pebble into the water, it ripples, it starts to ripple out. And the water isn't moving, but the effect is seen in those ripples. And this is what we basically have to do. We have to become those pebbles. We have to throw ourselves into this great ocean, this mystery, and allow it to ripple out into wherever it goes and land on whichever shore it lands. I think that's the best metaphor I can think of. So forget the curtain. Stop sweeping things under the carpet, and just like I feel really confident in saying to you, go into that inner world whichever way it wants to manifest itself. Give yourself whatever discipline you require to feel this voice coming from inside, whatever that is. And I guarantee there is a voice. As a painter, I produce thousands of works, and it's amazing. This voice just keeps on talking. Sometimes good and sometimes not so good. So, if there's anything I can pass on in my learned experience, the a posteriori, there is a voice in each one of you, and it wants to tell its story. Not somebody else's, but yours.